Hey everybody, it's ShadowStar here for my next classic Doctor Who review, The Space Museum. And honestly, I really enjoy the opening of this episode. I wasn't sure, obviously this is one I've either not seen or not really thought about much, but I really enjoyed the opening of this episode. Okay, sure, it does have that standard sense of First Doctor storytelling where we arrive outside the TARDIS and we explore. But even before we get into that, there's this whole mystery going on where this entire first part is such a huge mystery. First off, I do like the fact that I like in these classic stories that we actually see other parts of the TARDIS. We actually see, where they go to get drinks or whatever, which, doesn't really happen. It's rare that you see other parts of the TARDIS in modern Doctor Who, with the exception of a few episodes where it's just corridors. But we actually see it. I like when they treat the TARDIS as a place they live in, so that's nice. But then obviously there's this whole mystery. First, their clothes completely just changed to their default standard clothes after they were wearing clothes from what I assume was the previous story. And then Vicki breaks a glass, and then it magically heals itself and the water goes back into it. So it's almost as if, and then later on we find out this time thing going on where they phrase it so loosely that my interpretation is that ever since Vicki broke the glass, they've kind of been going backwards in time until they catch up to the point where they arrive, and then they'll go forwards in time, and then they're at risk. But obviously, they walk around and they think, oh, it's odd, it's all silent, which at first you don't think much of it. Then you're like, oh, why aren't we leaving footprints? I like how they keep mentioning things and they keep adding up bit by bit. These people walk outside and they don't see them. Then next time we see people, you can tell they're speaking, but we can't hear them. But then also, as the story implies, it's a space museum, so I do like that we get to walk around and, see things, and we don't see much exhibits, although we do see a Dalek, and we reference a previous story, and, it's nice to get some interactions between, Vicki and Ian and Brabber, who are familiar with the Daleks, and Vicki's not truly familiar with them, so, it's a nice little continuity reference as well, so, I love the feeling of this story, this whole first part of this story, I was actually invested. The pacing for this first part was really good. This whole first part is just, set up and giving you that mystery and what's going on. Then obviously you get the climax, because then obviously you get this bit where, first you think, well, they can't see us, we can't hear them, what's going on, we're invisible, because then they try to touch things and you just phase right through it. And for its age, I actually like the effect they use. Obviously, it's nothing special, but it's a nice kind of clever effect where they kind of clearly impose the image on top and put it at 50% transparency. But it's a nice simple effect that works for back in the day. I like the fact that the effects back then are the simple effects that anyone could do now, but it's a nice little thing. I like when you can really actually tell what the effect is. And it's a clever way of showing, because I'm that's an interesting way. I'd be curious to see how your hand going through something in a modern interpretation without your hand physically disappearing. It'd be interesting to see a modern version of that little special effect. But yeah, like I said, and then obviously it culminates in that cliffhanger where they find the TARDIS in an exhibit, then they find themselves in exhibits frozen, which is then when we get this whole explanation of there's this time distortion thing, and then, it shows the glass breaking again, so that's why I said my interpretation is, oh, maybe ever since Vicki broke the glass, they've been going backwards till they catch up with themselves, and I don't know, obviously they're very vague on how things work with this, but this first part is a really good first part to a story. Also, again, I'm glad it's a 4-part story, so let's just get on with it. Part 2, and the pacing is still going really well. One thing I actually like about this story, and honestly a lot of the first Doctor stories, is the Doctor not knowing literally everything. This expands to even in part 1, when they're walking around a museum and they don't understand everything, and the Doctor doesn't figure it out immediately. Whereas, I feel like if it were a modern Doctor, every time they didn't know something about why they're invisible, the Doctor would just come up with some excuse about how, oh, it's a perception filter, or it's this thing, or that thing, or, oh, I haven't seen this thing in ages. It's nice to have a Doctor who just doesn't know everything. But he's still smart, he's still fun, and you know what? As grumpy as the first Doctor is, this this story is really showing his whimsical side. So now that things are actually picking up, we get introduced to the people in this place. There's two factions. There's the so-called rebels and the people in charge. But like any Doctor Who story, you're not sure who the actual, quote, good guys are. Maybe the rebels aren't so bad. We don't know. We haven't really got much information. Meanwhile, the people in charge seem to be a bit too forceful and so on. First, yeah, it is odd that when they lift the case off an exhibit, alarms don't go off. Like, pretty much if you tried to do that in a real museum, it would. And obviously, the Doctor gets captured because it's a classic story, so somebody's got to get captured. But the Doctor gets captured, but it doesn't last because he fakes dead and then hides in the Dalek, which I've seen that image before. It's the iconic image, but it's just, I love how whimsical they are about taking the piss out of the Daleks in the classic stories, like him just hiding in a Dalek and then imitating a Dalek and so on. So, it's just, the first Doctor is so delightful, and he's more than just a grumpy old Doctor, and I love that. But then we get a really good scene. The Doctor finally comes face to face with the person the curator of the museum or so on, and we get this sort of lie detector test where it doesn't matter what you say because the screen will show an image of what's going through your mind, and I like this because it reminds me of something you'd see in the Moffat era. It reminds me of sort of like how the face huggers where you can't think about them and suddenly that's all you think about. Or it reminds me of, say, the teller in Time Heist where you can't think guilty thoughts and suddenly that's all you think about. This feels like a simpler version of something Moffat would do. And obviously, immediately, the Doctor's able to trick them by just thinking of bullshit. He's like, how did you get here? And a picture of, like, an old-timey bike pops up. And he's like, who are your people? And it just shows some stock footage of, like, seals and walruses playing in the water. It's so random. I love it. It's so funny. But yeah, man, this is such a fun, whimsical story so far. Meanwhile, the companions are just trying to walk around, and then they get the idea to use a piece of string. So they're like, where do we get a piece of string? And, I do like the fact that they just completely rip open Barbara's jacket without even asking. They're like, I'll just take that off. Thank you very much. It's like, okay then. This part has been so delightful, and the pacing once again has been on point. Like, there was a little bit of I guess you could call it a joke at the beginning when they were like, which way did we come from? It's like, it was left, it was right, and then nobody knows anything, and like, alright, that dragged on a tiny bit, but I am curious when, obviously, what's going to happen with these rebels, because they're a part of the story, but they've not interacted with anyone, they're trying to capture a Doctor, and like, we can't tell who's good or bad, but so far, everything's interesting. The companions got outside and saw that they've got the TARDIS, and then the Doctor's been threatened with being part of the museum, which is what they're trying to avoid. And I like the whole argument of, like, we're trying to change the future, but we don't know the events that lead to the future. So we're like, well, maybe this is the events that lead to the future. We don't know. It's like, what do we do? We don't know what we want to not do. But halfway through the story and the pacing is really good. I'm thoroughly enjoying the Space Museum. I will say, as we went into part 3, the tone has definitely changed. The first part definitely was this spooky mystery. The second part put a lot of focus on changing the future, and you still occasionally get a mention of that, but now it's more about avoiding the guards. We finally get some context, and as it turns out, of course, naturally, the so-called rebels are the good guys. It's their planet, of course, and the museum was forcibly put here. So yeah, it makes the guards vicious. I mean, we already knew that because they're capturing the Doctor and everyone. Took me a while to even realise this third part is Doctorless, because, of course, I guess William Hartnell needed a week break, because that's what they do in the classic days. The real MVP of this part, though, is Ian fucking Chesterton. This man, my God, I mean, he killed an Aztec in a previous story, but here, like, this guy's going to have some stories to tell at that companion meeting because, like, he takes, first off, he calls the bluff. Like, when they've got them armed at gunpoint, he just calls a bluff and he's like, well, what? You were told to capture us, not kill us, so you're not going to kill us. I love that, and I love, it's not just him calling the bluff. I really love his acting. Like, he's such a smart ass, and I'm loving it. And then, then he holds another guard at gunpoint, And again, being such a badass, and then, he's like, the guards are like, well, you won't kill me, it won't do you any good. It's like, will it? It'll still be fun. Ian's a fucking murderer. I don't care, he is. And obviously, yeah, Vicki finds the rebels find Vicki, and they tell the story of how their planet was invaded and so on. Meanwhile, Barbara's with this other rebel. Oh, wait, she passed out from the gas. Yeah, I guess that's our cliffhanger. Barbara's passed out from the gas. Because, yeah, the guards are blocking the TARDIS. Now there's no guards blocking the TARDIS, but I guess Ian doesn't have a key to the TARDIS. But yeah, then the story ends with Ian holding the curator. Ian's holding him hostage and finds the Doctor, supposedly. I don't know if he's put in a glass case. We're about to find out. There's only one part left to go, but I really enjoyed this part. Ian is so fun in this part. Like, every moment, every time Ian had a line, he was so in charge, he was so take control, and he was like, damn, companions get to do stuff. Or at least Ian sure does, and, Vicky's doing stuff too. Vicky's not the helpless companion getting captured. Like, Vicki, she reminds me a little bit of Jo Grant. Maybe her mannerisms. She's Jo Grant, except she's more intelligent. No offense, Jo Grant. Because apparently they just break the security machine. That was the world's shittest security machine. They just pull the top off, rearrange some wires, and then it accepts any truthful answer. Okay, I guess. We'll just accept that. Oh, you know what? I can't really complain. If this were a modern story, they just would have used a sonic screwdriver. So, you know what? Vicky's allowed to just hack a computer system. Sure, why not? But hey, this part, Ian, can we just talk about how amazing Ian was? Like, I just love him. It's this whole part's like, damn, Ian, go for it. There's so many moments like, oh man, Ian was so funny in this, that moment where he calls a bluff, and then he keeps getting progressively closer to the point where the gun's right up against him, and as we all know, what do I do when somebody jams a gun in my face? So then he just takes the gun, and then and then the rebels, they're like, oh, we can't stop the guards, there's too many of them. But there's only one guard guarding the security machine. They just sneak up and beat the shit out of him. Usually it's like a quick knock on the neck, but no, they pound the crap out of him. There's so many random moments. This story's all over the place, but in a really fun way. Like, it's not random and all over the place like he's a Marinus. It's more like the tone changed, but in a sort of, I like when it's a good kind of tone change, because you start with the mystery, then we build up to a climax, and then obviously we're going to have the climax. Presumably the rebels will win, we'll save the Doctor, we'll save ourselves from not being captured, but, I'm still loving, and like I said, I'm still loving Ian being in charge of frickin' everything, so yeah, I'm enjoying this. I'm really enjoying the Space Museum, so let's finish it, shall we? And so the story comes to an end, and once again, Ian was a freaking amazing character in the story, but I also loved the Doctor in his story too. When, he gets free, and they're like, well, we could put you in the machine, but I won't. But I could. But isn't it so good that I have better morals than you? I really love that. It's so in tune with the Doctor. But at the same time, he's also, self-aware enough to know that he could do it. It almost feels like something the 12th Doctor would do in Series 8 when, he has that sort of darker strand, but his morals still win in the end. And I like that. The First Doctor is so delightful. I'm really coming to love the First Doctor in these stories since I haven't seen him much. So it turns out they're not really dead or stiff. They're just kind of cryogenically frozen, and they can undo it if they do it carefully. So whatever, the Doctor gets free, and then I like it again. They have a discussion on changing the future, and it's almost like the conversation of free will and fate, where they're like, well, is everything we've done up to this point what we were gonna do in the first place? But then I suppose it's that also story of well, we might think that, but then there's also the fact that Vicki inadvertently starts a revolution. So yeah, and then obviously Vicki forms a connection with that one guy, but, at first they thought, oh, I guess they found the guns, and then they just come in all guns blazing and utterly, literally shoot up everyone. So, it's a complete massacre. They're not holding back either, Unlike the Doctor, who's like, oh, you shouldn't do. That's the one thing that's different about this. Is in a modern story, especially for, like, say, the 10th or 11th, he wouldn't be happy about the revolution being violent, sort of like in The Doctor's Daughter. But here, the Doctor has no issue with the fact that they were saved by people at gunpoint just running in and shooting everyone. He doesn't even make a passing comment on it either. But, I suppose that's the way it is, whereas future Doctors would be condemning them even if they agree with the fact that this is rightfully their planet. But, oh well, sometimes the Doctor lets things slip by either way, so... But, I enjoyed this wrap-up, and like I said, I really enjoyed the pace of the story. The first part was purely the mystery. Then you kick off with something sinister afoot, with them supposedly being in it. You have a great discussion on, like, free will and fate. We, have the classical story idea of two sides at war, and the rebels are actually the good guys, and, I feel like this is a really good, well done... It's got, like, all the good tropes of a classic story. It's got a mystery, it's got the exploration, it's got people getting split up, it's got two sides warring against each other, and one side turns out to be the better version. This story really does have everything, and like I said, every character in a story, if I had to say the weakest character, I'd say Barbara. Not that she did anything wrong, I just feel like everyone else got lots of good moments. Like, Vicki helped start the revolution and got a lot of good scenes in parts 3 and 4. Ian was frickin' amazing. The Doctor is always delightful, although he's missing in part 3. I feel like Barbara was the one who didn't get to do too much per se, but she was enjoyable. I feel like this wasn't the strong story for Barbara, which is fine, every story has a strong and weak point, but that's fine, you're carrying 3 companions and a Doctor, not every time is there going to be all of them getting amazing moments. And that's fine, that happens both in modern and classical, and it's better than some classic stories where they literally stay in the TARDIS, so, all in all, I actually enjoyed it. And then obviously it ends with that's the thing with these classic stories, is although it's one story, they really do keep you going, because it just kicks off with a cliffhanger for the next story, which will be the next one I'm doing. The next one I'm doing is The Chase, which I think I might have seen that one before, because I think it might actually have one of my favourite moments. Assuming I'm remembering it, I don't know, all these First Doctor stories blur together in my head. That's why I'm liking doing these reviews, is a lot of First Doctor stories really blur together in my head, so these reviews are helping me section them off and say, aha, this is this one, and this story, again, really stands out. So, I'd say if you're looking for a good First Doctor story to show someone and you don't want to watch every damn story, so especially since some are missing, this is a good one to show people and say, some great First Doctor moments, some great Ian. Like, if you want to say, especially since just the other day when we had the whole Ian appearing in Power of the Doctor, if anyone says, I wonder what Ian was like in the classic stories, show them the Space Museum. I mean, there's probably other stories, but I haven't seen all of them, but if you want good Ian, show them the Space Museum. I'd say Space Museum, it's Ian's time to shine, and there's lots of other good stuff in it. I really like the pacing was really good. Other than that, there's a little bit of slowdown in part 2, but I feel like the pacing kept trucking on at a good pace. So, like, this is proof that even by classic standards, the pacing is really well. Like, this is better pacing than a modern 2-parter sometimes. And that's well done. When you can get a classic story with good pacing, that's what I love. Keep on going with these 4-parters. So if I haven't said it already, I enjoyed the Space Museum, and I'm enjoying these First Doctor stories. Like, classic Who can very much be hit or miss. There's some amazing stories, but then I always remember some are weak ones. But, like, so far, every review I've tried, I've enjoyed all of them. The Aztecs, Marinus, this one, all of them have been good, although Marinus had some weak points, but this one's been great. Anyway, enough about other stories. I will see you next week for more Doctor Who reviews and other things as well. See you next time, guys.